The Child Psych podcast brings to you the top parenting and mental health experts in the world, designed to educate and inspire you with current research and concrete strategies that foster resiliency and healing in children and teens. Most importantly, we're here because we need to raise a generation of children who don't need to recover from their childhoods. If you are loving our show, we would be so appreciative if you leave us a review or rating at icphelps.com or on your favorite podcast platform.
Hello and welcome everyone. I am Tanya Johnson.
And I'm Tammy Schmoon.
We're psychologists, the co-founders of the Institute of Child Psychology, and probably most importantly, mums.
And we are here with Kim John Payne. We have known Kim for actually many years, and we were so excited to see his face this morning as he's actually mentored us when we first started the Institute of Child Psychology. He is an award-winning author who has been quietly and passionately working to help tens of thousands of people give voice to the feeling that something is not okay about our new normal of overwhelm that so many people are now experiencing. He offers doable ways to realize the hopes and values we all have for ourselves and to build deep connections with our children that gives families resiliency and simple joy. Kim is a consultant and trainer to over 230 U.S. independent public schools. He has been a school counselor, adult educator, consultant, researcher, educator, and a private family counselor for 27 years. He regularly gives keynote addresses at international conferences for educators, parents, and therapists, and runs workshops for trainings around the world. And we've had him as a keynote several times, so we can speak to his competencies, his professionalism, and warmth, and just one of our favorite speakers to just listen to. We could basically listen to you all day. We're just so happy to see your face. It feels like it's been too long.
Kim, is there anything that we didn't put in that bio that you want to add?
No, it's so lovely to hear one's obituary before one dies. It's really rather lovely. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Kim, all of your mentorship leads through our work because it's been so pivotal in our beliefs at the Institute. How did it start for you to begin to realize that really the core of our children's struggles lay in overwhelm?
It began for me actually quite young. I didn't, often beginnings you don't even realize you're beginning, but you are. When you look back, you say, oh yeah, that was a beginning. I was working in a group home for what was then called violent, offending, and recidivistic youth. What a horrible label, right? Anyway, I was working there. I did the action shift. It was called the action shift because it was. In the day, I was going to college and studying psychology. I'm okay now. I had a doctor, a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, who'd been a medic in the Second World War, actually, and as a very, very young man. And then he had been, he qualified as a doctor, went to Korea, to the Korean War, and worked there. And he was talking about what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, but that term wasn't really much used at all back then. This is the late 70s, early 80s. Combat veterans who weren't doing so well. So he was talking about combat veterans, right? And I was sitting there in this lecture hall and, in a fancy university thinking, he's describing my kids. He's describing the kids in my group home. Oh, nervous and jumpy, hypervigilant. Oh, that's Mitch, that's Warren. He was describing over-controlling behavior. Oh, gosh, that's Lucy and Maria. He was describing night terrors. That was them all, right? All of them. He would describe pushback against anything new, like looping behavior. That was so many, and I kept thinking of the kids in my group home. So I approached him afterwards and said, look, you're talking about combat veterans. I'm talking about kids, teenagers. And what is that even possible? And like a lot of professors, he said, oh, that is very interesting. You could make that your dissertation, when you go through the postgrad studies. And I thought, all right. So I stayed in touch with him for years. And then after I finished up, my training, I volunteered. I traveled and volunteered in Southeast Asia through Jakarta or Indonesia, a lot of turmoil, a lot of refugee camps, all the way up to eventually spending quite a bit of time in the Thai-Cambodian refugee camps at the end of the Vietnam War. There again, I saw nervous, jumpy, hypervigilant kids. I saw over-controlling kids. I saw kids who had a trigger, like a startle reflex. At night, the camps would just light up with screams and cries of the children, where myself as a very junior young member of the team with colleagues would go round and just calm children at night. They were so scared. And but it struck me how similar they were to the kids in the group home. Then when my time was up there, I decided to study this a little bit more, because at the time there wasn't really much out there about this. So I went to London in the UK and began studies into what we would now call trauma-informed treatment. But again, that term wasn't even about then. And I had a little family practice west of London, and through the door came kids from mixed racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, mixed socioeconomic stratas, but they looked unmistakably like the kids in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in my group home. And it looked like they were living in a war zone, only they were somewhat typical kids. And it was just a major puzzle that, and actually it's interesting, Tanya, you asked, because I actually set it at arm's length because it was too big a thought. I thought, this can't be possible. I really do want something much more normal now. And, but it kept being unmistakably present. And I came to think of it as these kids were living in the undeclared war on childhood, because they had this unrelenting, low-grade, under-the-radar stress. It's all I could find, because I didn't really know, you know. At the time, there was a brain imaging was becoming available for research practices, which was new. It would only be available for medical practices before that. And so I started looking through files, and shots of brain imaging that started to establish that basically, in my words, that this was what I called cumulative stress reaction. These children were living in a world that was hostile to them. Only they were normal. They were normal kids, but life was too sexy, too young, too much, too fast. And their everyday life was, their nervous systems were becoming more and more elevated and overwhelmed. And so they were suffering from what I thought of as amygdala hijack, this term that is now known. And so that was, and by the way, that's a long story, but that's your fault, 'cause it was a really good question. But that's what started me on this adult, lifelong, 30-plus year study of realizing that the highly stressed family has become the new normal. And yet there are so many parents with a gut instinct that this is not okay. This is really, really not okay. But what are the alternatives? How can I live in a normal Western lifestyle in an industrialized country? And by the way, the so-called industrializing or second world are now experiencing this exact same problem as well. It's not just the first world, so-called. How can I keep my life on the rails, but at the same time not accept the new normal of the supersized family life that is just simply too much for not just our kids, but for our whole family? We feel overwhelmed, and what can we do? And that is what I've tried to help parents with for over 3 decades now.
I resonate with that inner voice saying, like, it's okay, we don't have to do so much, but there's a lot of guilt there because that isn't the norm. And so many parents are fed this diet of do, overstimulate, give them as many experiences as possible so they can get ahead in life and get the best job or get into the best college. And what I love about your work is it slows everything down. And we have these 4 fundamental pillars that help guide us as parents.
And in the new edition of Simplicity Parenting, I actually added a 5th because something else has been coming up over these last 5 or so years. I'll mention that in brief in a moment. But these 4 pathways of simplifying actually weren't my invention at all. I want to really give credit to all the hundreds, or actually thousands really, of parents that I've worked with over the years, because these are the little 2-degree changes. They're not wholesale changes. They're little 2-degree trajectory shifts that if you make this little doable small change today, next week it won't be much different, but next month you'll notice it. Next year you'll notice it a lot. And when your child is growing on up, you're in a very different, connected, much more connected, much calmer place over time. One of the first pathways is that of in our home, organizing, simplifying, and decluttering. Now, the reason I think this has been so effective is, one is that it's vaguely doable. We can all organize and declutter. But out there in the world, if you think about the principle of out there and then in here, out there, the world is pretty disorganized at the moment. It just feels like there's a lot of stuff shifting around for kids. I think they pick it up consciously, the older ones, or unconsciously, the little ones. And we've had it a lot lately, school and then no school, masking and then no mask, like it's all choppy, So if we don't only declutter, but in the process of organize and declutter our own spaces first, the kitchen, our own studies, bedrooms, and then the common spaces, lounge rooms, and so on. And then only thirdly, our children's bedrooms and play spaces. Then they'll feel much more like this has been normalized, and even that it's a treat, actually, and not push back hard against it. But we're giving the feeling that in here, things are organized. Your toys, if it's a younger child, your crafting is on that shelf in those basket. Those toys are in this container and it goes here, and there's a cloth over the top of it to just make it visually much less stimulating. And that goes there, and this goes here. And in your little world, there is a place for you because there's a place for everything. Little children are very visual and tactile like that. And the fact that there's a place for my crafting materials means there's a place for me. There's a place.
It creates a predictability for kids. Like it's predictable. I know what to expect in my world.
In my world, my mummy and daddy, or my guardians, know how, and by the way, this is what this also suggests, is that they provide a safe place for me.
Absolutely.
This is a secure and safe place. Mm-hmm. So that's the first pathway, was that the families that have rhythm and predictability have really resilient kids and are very connected parents. Over the years, I've also noticed that there are the big rhythms and the little rhythms, the macro and the micro. The big rhythms are the big wins. When we get up, when we have our morning snack, when we have lunch, when we have our playtime, this is if it's little children, when we have our adventure time, that's all the when. When is the big rhythm. And the little rhythm is like the little rituals. It's like the little breadcrumbs, all the little things that we do. In the same way, every night, like if I'm a little boy and I'm 6 years old and I come into the bath, if it's bath time, I put my pajamas on that hook because there's a picture of a dinosaur on that hook, and that's where I put my pajamas, and I like them because they're cozy warm then. And then I go hop, hop, hop over to the bath, and my daddy sings me this bath song, and he always sings the same one, and I only have 2 toys because my mum read the stupid Simplicity Parenting book. And and then I come out the bath and I hop and I get rubbed down with the scratchy towel. My sister likes the soft one, but I like the scratchy one with the dinosaur picture on, and all the way to, this is my toothbrush in this cup, and it's all the little breadcrumbs all the way to bed. And then the bedtime has a big when, but now there are all the little rituals. We talk a lot about safety and security and conversely anxiety and fear in childhood. And a lot of anxiety coming up now. You've probably noticed this as therapists, a lot of anxiety coming up. And when I'm asked what can we do for anxiety, this is one of the major ones that I've been increasingly working. This is where I go to if a child's getting a little nervous, anxious, is pushing back, is behaving in a way that's really hard, is rhythm, ritual. And the third little sibling in that family of three of rhythm, big rhythms, little rhythms, that's ritual, is predictability, is to actually in the evenings have a little bit of a look forward to the next day. And then at breakfast time, if a child's little, have a little looking forward. Every meal time, one can do a mini preview. Every time a child eats, there's an opportunity for a mini preview. And then it means, if mum says, well, do you remember we were going to go on a bike ride? It's a lovely day today, remember? And yeah, that's right. We're going down and we'll get some things too. And it's like, my mum is just the smartest person because she said that was going to happen, and it does. I am safe. Every time we preview and it happens, a child's resiliency increases. So that's the second one.
I think what I love about that is so often when we look at anxiety at bedtime, as an example, we're looking right at that moment. Why is this child stressed? But what I'm hearing you say right now is that if we increase a child's rhythm and predictability over that 24-hour period, we're really helping them when we get to those more stressful periods in a day for a child.
It's interesting because people sometimes would ask me, what time do you start getting your children ready for bed? And I would always answer 6 a.m. It was the quality of the rhythm and the rituals through the day that had them be able to release in the evening and fall back into their angel's wings, as we used to say, back into sleep, because they weren't still processing the day. They'd had enough decompression points through the day, and they'd also had enough rhythm and predictability to have not have a super activated nervous system that was still on overdrive, and then to have them release and not have bedtime as being like a parental hostage-taking situation, where they just won't release you. And the reason they won't release very often is that they are still processing and they need a point of safety to do that. And that's why a lot of kids, well, let me put it the other way. When this rhythm, predictability, and preview, these three siblings are present in a child's life, parents often say things like, in the evenings, I've got my life back. Yeah. And so that's that. It just adds such a feeling of security. And I don't mean just for little children. I mean this for teenagers, especially for teenagers as well. So that was the second thing. The third was I started noticing how well kids responded to having more decompression time. I started noticing that when they had 2 to 3, at least minimum, 3 to 4 at best, times of decompression, like a safety release valve through the day, how much more emotionally resilient they were, how more connected to their parents they were, and how overscheduling a child when there's just too much, when there's ballet on Monday and Wednesday and soccer on Tuesday and Thursday and family psychotherapy on Friday to cope with it all, and then on Saturday the travel team, and then we're off to somewhere else on Sunday, and it's a little bit like It's the overwhelm is so strong that I know there's a lot of good stuff in the world, but it's too much good stuff. It's like, so, for me, when I started noticing children dialing back their schedules and simplifying and balancing, how much more their behavior improved. This was one of the big behavioral ones, really. In a study that we did, myself and my colleague Bonnie River conducted, we took 53 children with ADHD, both inattentive and hyperactive type. We noticed that of the different cohorts we had in this study, one of the biggest changes, the second biggest change to having a child move out of ADHD and literally not be diagnosed was when their schedules were dialed back. The biggest one was screens. That's the biggest change. The kids who had dialed back their screen, and that's that fourth pathway, is the pathway of adult information, just too much adult information in two ways. Firstly, via us talking too much about adult stuff in front of our kids. It's scary for them. It's very awakening. The nervous system really gets jangled. The vagal pathways, sympathetic, parasympathetic, all that stuff that your therapists know about. And the second was screens. Now, I'm not necessarily anti-screen, but I am passionately pro-connection. And screens, they just use so much time. The average North American child now, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, a very reputable study, has found the average child in North America is exposed to around about 9 hours of screens per day.
Oh, that's up from 7 to 8 from the last time there was a major study. It was 7 to 8. Now it's up to 9.
Kaiser Family Foundation in 2011 did a study which found 7.5. Then the Common Sense Media Foundation did another study in 2018-19, and they found it was just below 9. And then the Kaiser Family Foundation study of just very recently published again that it's up. Now, the way a child relaxes, the way a child decompresses, and the way the nervous system resets, ready to learn at school the next day, ready to have friends, ready to be involved in family life, is through engagement with nature, number one, time for nature. Number two is friends and family. I mean, particularly friends and play. Like real friends, not online friends, but real friends. The third connection is family values. And the fourth connection is connection to my own true north, to me, who I am as a child. All that takes time. It takes time for a child to be in nature fully. It takes time for them to play games and go through all the social emotional learning involved in friendship. It takes time to connect, to truly connect with family. And it takes time to just know who you are, as opposed to what the marketing forces are telling you who you should be. And the marketing forces are being delivered, of course, on screens. And so it was really interesting that recently I actually was accepted into a marketing conference to children. I wanted to go undercover. I was embedded. And it was worth going to this conference, and it was a very prestigious conference. All the big app designers, the children's food, the clothing companies, they were all there. And it was worth it for 2 words. 2 words, all that whole weekend stood out for me, is that people like us now are no longer referred to as parents. We have a new name. We are no longer referred to as parents by marketers. We are referred to as, our new name is purchasing friction. That's our name. We are purchasing friction. And this conference, the title of it was Successful Case Studies in the Removal of Purchasing Friction.
Many families have struggled in 2022 At the Institute, we want to walk alongside you into 2023 to ensure it's a year full of connection, love, and growth. For the month of December only, we will be offering 50% off of all of our pre-recorded courses. These courses cover an array of topics pertaining to children's mental health and wellness and are packed with the latest research, tools, and strategies. Go to icphelps.com for more information.
Frightening.
That is frightening.
And $16 billion a year were represented in that room. The sum total of spending that those companies made in North America in one calendar year was $16 billion, just in that room. So our family life is, honestly, it is just under direct attack. And when we put a screen in our child's hands, we are giving them the weapon of mass disconnection to our values. Yeah. And so that is my worry, and has been for years, about screens. I'm a techie guy. I taught information technology in high school for a number of years. I'm not opposed to it, but it's too much, too soon. It's like Gordon Neufeld, one of your fellow Canadians, talked about at one of your conferences.
Yeah, we've had him several times.
Yeah, Gordon said something really interesting once. Screens should be like ice cream, only eaten after a very nutritious, lifelong meal of family connection.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is so beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's a battle we have as parents with screens, because it's so intoxicating for kids, of course. And I think with COVID, we were all working from home and we're just trying to get our stuff done. And I think parents survived by giving their kids screens. And now we're trying to readjust to a different norm, and getting kids off of them is like taking, an alcoholic away from the bottle. Like it's really hard to pull them back now. And that, I think, is a battle many parents are facing. It was a necessity for survival for 2 years for parents to get it through the day. And now it's like, well, we want to go back to pre-COVID, but these kids are hooked on them.
Well, I went to another conference where a very, very well-known neurologist showed 12 slides and said, now, people who'd studied brain science a lot, tell us which of these brain images strike you and what are they? And so we looked at all 12 and we said, oh, well, that's addiction, because the dopamine, there was huge releases of dopamine around the dopamine release centers. And he said, absolutely, you're absolutely right. That is cocaine. That is cocaine. Addiction, that you are absolutely right for 6 of them. What are the other 6? We all kind of looked at each other, and then it became obvious he was talking about gaming. These were brain images taken of children who were gaming for 1 hour. And you could not tell the difference between that and cocaine. So they're the 4 pathways. And it's interesting that the children in our studies, and certainly the tens and tens of thousands of children who have had their parents simplify and balance their lives, many parents, this is in one way or another, have said over the years, I feel like I've got my child back. I feel like I'm living closer to what I hoped my family would be. I feel like the teachers are noticing it. My extended family are noticing it. Life is just closer to what I wanted it to be. And it's really interesting because sometimes people say to me, well, Kim, simplicity, that's really sweet. That's kind of cute. But it's not the world we live in. But here's something interesting, is that if your child's 9 years old, around 9 right now, by the time they're done with college or in the workplace, over 65% of all employment will be self-employment. Okay, so 65%, where you need grit, determination, resiliency, self-creativity, self-motivation. Where do you get that? You get that from living a simple, balanced life. You get that from not being overscheduled and having to come up with with ideas for play. And if your parents can give you the gift of boredom, right?
Huge.
Just being bored because all the skills that are required when you list them, as I just did now, grit, determination, self-motivation, innovation, adaptability is a big one for self-employment, flexibility, and particularly impulse control. All those qualities are learnt in play. They're learnt in family connection, family values. They are not learnt on screens. They are not learnt through overwhelm, through overscheduling. And so when people say that to me, oh, it's well and good, but that's really sweet, that's in the past, I say, oh, no. This is the future. This simplifying and giving our children balance in their lives is giving them an enormous head start in the world that is with us and is coming big time. And so it's not disadvantaging children to give them a childhood. It just isn't.
Okay, I just want for our audience to know, like in our homes, and Tanya can speak to this, how we've used your work. I just want to so one thing I've done in my home is I cycle through toys. We don't buy our kids a ton of toys. I can't actually remember the last time I bought my kids toys. Like it's been a long time. And we have like a crawl space that I put toys in boxes and bins, and then we bring them back out. And we ensure our kids have real things to play with that aren't like, I don't know, like some fake version of it. Like
it's nature items.
Nature items. They also use, like when they were younger, my son would use actual pots and pans from the kitchen. Like he felt like he was engaging in that world. So reducing the number of toys in my home was really important. And I still do that. Is there anything you can think of?
Yeah, well, plastic. But, I think something that I took from you is also just saying no to things coming into our house. Because I think for so many parents, they say, but how do I do this at birthdays and Christmas? And I think just standing with who I want to be in the world and who I want my children to be, and to just say, no, this is not what we want.
And it's also got to do with when one can talk to extended family and the unrelenting gifting in-laws, about the gift of time, about the world our children are moving, because often this stuff is given and it's very, very well-meaning. It really is. But just to say, look, these are the values in our family. To say to your own mum, look, don't give all this deluge of stuff to your grandchildren. I am a woman of values. Thank you very much. You raised me to be a man and a woman, a mum and a dad of values. And this is my value, to live simply. So it's really your fault. This is the value I live by. Please help me with these values. I don't mean that they're right for everyone, but they're right for us. It's that. That.
I preview, and my mom made fun of me yesterday on the phone. She says, your son really likes to make lists and likes to tell me about what he has planned for the day. What? And she laughed and she's like, did you get that from me? And I said, well, I kind of did, but I know this really brilliant man and I know this from working with kids with anxiety, that's really important that we sit together in the morning and we talk about what's coming that day. And before we go to bed, we say, what's happening tomorrow? And now my kids make lists of like, what are we going to do? What's the menu for the day? And it's just how they organize their world. And I've been doing it since they were so little that now my mom teases me about it.
Yeah, at our last conference, Kim, you spoke about the rose and thorn ritual. And that's something that I always hold on to with my kids too, is what was really great about your day and what was difficult about your day. And that's where I find the continuity that you're talking about in rhythm and predictability.
Yeah, and then we had, the third was scheduling. And I have a rule in my house, and I think Tanya has her own rules. Every family's different. Now, granted, I am on a farm, so my kids find lots of things to do. I don't really have to do much. But our rule is our kids are only in one activity, like a semester, so to speak. Like each season, they get a new activity. So one kiddo's in gymnastics once a week. One's in youth group. She doesn't even like organized anything. This is fine. It's not her. And my son's in soccer. And then that's it. There is no other activities. Like we stay home a lot. We do a lot of family stuff. It's a farm. We have lots to do. But that was like a key, like for me, was a value, and I won't budge on that. I'm pretty rigid about it, actually. That it's like, no, we need family time.
Yeah, and sometimes, coaches, and this is Luis and I wrote about this, and Scott in our Beyond Winning book. Coaches try to bring you in more and more and more to sports. It's an economic model, it's a business model, but it's also they can also just want to have kids do more, but just to say no to that. And also, the rubber hits the road of this sometimes just with birthday parties, actually. You're at the park with the kids and you look at your watch and you think, you know what, we could stay longer, but these kids are going to be super grumpy if we do. They're going to be tired. They're going to be low blood sugar. No, we are going to go home now and have supper at the time we normally do. We're going to do the same. And then you put the kids to bed that night and you think, thank goodness I made that decision. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because if I hadn't, we would have crying, we would have meltdowns, we would have grumpy little gnomes on our hands. And you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Kim, you said parenting has become a parental arms race. And I think that's what we're talking about with the scheduling and the coaches, right? They need to be in more and another team and another tier and more coaching. It's more.
Yeah. And it is like parenting has become like a contact sport. And the interesting thing about it all is that when we give space for childhood, these kids do academically much, much better at school. Because the frontal lobes in the brain, the neocortex, all these learning centers, cognitive centers of the brain, are not being overtaken with what Daniel Goldman called, he picked up this term, amygdala hijack. The amygdala, the fight or flight brain, operates twice as fast as the frontal lobes, 1/16th of a second. Frontal lobes take 1/8. And so they're fast. So the fight or flight brain, when a child is stressed and there's a bunch of adrenaline and cortisol and they're living life at a really fast pace, over 80% of their academic learning brain, their empathy brain, their friendship brain, if we put it in all these ways, their humor brain, closes down over 80%. So one of the things we've noticed over and over, this small fleet, this armada of simplicity parenting coaches have noticed and gotten feedback on, is how two things happen. One is that when kids have a more simple, balanced life, they get more friends. Life is funnerer. No such word, but it's a good one. And the other one is how academic abilities increase, how reading, numeracy, how that shoots forward. And people say, who would have thought? And I tend to say, me, I would have thought, because there's a really straightforward brain-based answer to it.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And then our fourth pillar was screens.
Yeah. And Tan, this is something you know lots about, more than I do. You've done a lot of work on this.
Yeah. Kim, I think for me, the biggest thing with screens is for parents to look at their own screen use first. We spend so much time looking at our kids' screen use, whereas our screen use is often completely out of control. So that's the biggest message that I always give parents, is start with yourself first before you start with your child.
One of the things that many of the dear families I work with, I recommend Victoria Dunkley's work, Dunkley. She's a medical doctor that here in the United States is really pioneering what's now become known as electronic screen syndrome. And she wrote a wonderful book called Reset Your Child's Brain. It's a 28-day regime. And this answers the question of my children's levels of dopamine, adrenaline, and cortisol got raised all through COVID times. How do I reset? And she's figured out very, very accurately, it's about 28 days. And in her book, Reset Your Child's Brain, she just lays out a doable plan, and probably at least half the parents I work with, and that's hundreds and hundreds of parents over the last couple of years, have gone on that regime. And there's only a very small handful of parents who would ever go back to the same amount of screen use now, because the kids aren't bugging so much about it. They're not fighting so much to get it. But it is a question of a brain reset. She said, we can try and reduce slowly. And she says, okay, she makes a case for that on her website, Victoria Dunkley, MD. She makes a case for that. But she says, really, if you want to get your life back again, it's a brain reset that's needed, and she tells you exactly how to do it.
Oh, beautiful.
Well, that's good. We're going to look that up because I've never heard of that work. So that's so wonderful.
Yep.
I want to know what the fifth pillar is.
Yeah, what's the fifth? Before we wrap up this pod, this is kind of our last thing we'll talk about before we wrap up. The fifth pillar.
Yeah, the fifth pillar. I got a chance for the 10th anniversary of Simplicity Parenting book, because it's this so-called #1 bestseller. You know how editors are. All this hoopla about it. But they wanted me to do a second edition. It's not very often you get to do not just a second edition, but a complete rewrite. So one of the biggest sections I wrote was actually about screens, catching up on all the research. But I added a fourth pillar, a fifth pathway, a fifth pathway. And the fifth pathway is that of simplifying and clarifying family leadership and family values. Because marketing forces have become so good at manipulating us, I think more and more we need to live closer and closer to our family values. Because I noticed the families that had a constant refrain when their children would say, but can't I get an iPhone? Can't I? And they would say, or can't we do this or that? And it was clearly overwhelm for the kids. I noticed mums and dads and grandparents, guardians, who would say things like, yeah, I know all your friends have, got an iPad at the age of 6 or, whatever. But in our family, we don't. In our family, this is how we do it. In our family, we have board games. We play board games. In our family, we go cycling a lot, don't we? In our family, we build forts. I know, that was the best tree fort ever in our family. And I've just noticed that the families that did that, they basically they didn't follow the magnetic north of toxic pop culture. They stayed close to their own true north of family values. And I've watched these kids grow up and go to college, and it's not like they don't have their dark times and their difficult times, but when they do have those difficult times, they've actually got a true north. They've got a light to move towards in that dark tunnel, because many kids, when they hit college, go through difficult times, and I've watched them, and the kids that have been raised with the true north of family values, those family values morph into their own internalized values, and they get through it, and they do well, and they're quiet leaders in their group. And I noticed it and kept noticing it, to the point where I asked my editor, could I write a fifth? And she was thrilled to do it, because she has 3 kids, and she knows. So the fifth pathway gives hints and all kinds of ideas of how to stay true to your family values when there are so many marketing forces and so much pressure to just follow the pack.
So, Kim, we're just going to ask you kind of 3 questions that we ask everyone on this podcast. And the first is, what is the best parenting advice you've ever gotten?
The best parenting advice I've ever gotten is follow your instincts.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Actually, and it'd be the best parenting advice I could give. People often ask me, where can we get more information? When I talk to them, I always say, here, within you. Yeah. Within you, because we know this is overwhelming. It's like there's been a tap turned on and it's pouring into our children's vessels, and it's just too much. It's too much coming in. There's too much spillage, and And the decision that many parents are making now and they're faced with is that do we spend our life mopping up spillage of bad behavior and of overwhelm and anxiety, or do we turn down the tap?
Beautiful.
And really that would be my best advice to parents, is just turn down the tap. Have the courage to turn down the tap. Listen to your heart, turn down the tap.
Gorgeous. What's the worst parenting advice you've ever heard?
It's usually whenever I hear the word cute. When I hear the word cute, my head snaps in that direction because it usually means developmentally highly inappropriate. That's so cute. It's like, whoa, what's going on? The worst parenting advice is to ignore your own inner voice and follow some guy who's written a book. And I know that's weird because I've written 8 of them, right? But it's if you pick up a book or a podcast or whatever, and at an instinctual gut and heart level, it's like, yeah. That keeps me in charge. That's true to my instinct. That's fantastic. But following some kind of parenting fad, like there's this fad, then that fad, then this fad. I talk about that in several of my books. All these parenting fads is be careful about that. Be really careful, because your kids know. There was a couple of 12-year-old and a 10-year-old daughter, a couple of girls sitting at the table. I was with some friends, and the mother was talking about parenting and so on. And the 12-year-old looked at the 10-year-old and said, yeah, it's like weird, right? She's reading another parenting book. She'll be okay in a couple of months.
Yeah, they can. Well, they see through it.
Yeah,
it's a smoke screen. They see through
it. They do.
And the third one, what's other than your organization and all your 8 lovely books? What is your favorite resource that you recommend to parents?
I know this is again not what your question is aiming towards, but I can't help but say that your best resource is within you. And the reason I emphasize this is because there's so much out there in this parenting space now. It's one of the biggest, next to cookbooks, it's the next best-selling section in the world of books, apparently. There's so much out there. My best advice in terms of resources is to go within, but to do that, we've got to slow our own lives down as well. And that's the beauty of simplicity parenting, is that you're slowing your kids' life down, but in the doing of that, you're slowing your own life as well. And that kind of gut brain, the instinctual brain, has then got space to be heard.
Well, if you want to find Kim's work, he has an old simplicityparenting.com.
But Kim, it's been so beautiful to talk to you today.
It's just so nice to see you.
So lovely to see you. Okay, bye-bye for now.
If you enjoyed listening to the Child Psych podcast, we would be delighted if you left us a review or rating on icphelps.com or on your favourite podcast platform. We have so much more to share with you at ICP, and whether you're looking for parenting support or you're a professional looking for strategies to help children who are struggling with their mental health, we have the answers you're looking for. At ICP, we offer a unique membership program that gives you access to over 60 accredited online courses and past conference workshops offered by the top experts on the planet, and also provides a community platform where you can connect with like-minded professionals and parents, sharing ideas, resources, as well as advice from the ICP team of professionals. You can access our courses and workshops through your desktop or through our app, offered exclusively to our members. Please go to icphelps.com to start your journey with us today.